You're listening to the Monocle Daily, first broadcast on the 12th of February 2026 on Monocle Radio.
Today on the show, Europe takes stock of a changing world, diplomacy with Iran drifts without resolution, politics collides with the Winter Olympics, and a Prime Minister tries to win back voters with a podcast. I'm Georgina Godwin. The Monocle Daily starts now. Hello and welcome to the Monocle Daily, coming to you live from our studios here at Midori House in London. I'm Georgina Godwin. My guests Tira Schubart and Jonathan Fenby will discuss the day's big stories, including an interesting poll that's been published ahead of the Munich Security Conference and an informal meeting between EU members underlying the uncertainty within the bloc. Plus, we'll speak to the man behind the global coverage of the Winter Olympic Games. Stay tuned. All that and more coming up right here on the Monocle Daily. Welcome to the Monocle Daily. I'm joined today by Tira Schubart, who's a Fellow of the Royal Astronomical Society and Ambassador for the Science Museum, and Jonathan Fenby, journalist, author and former editor of the South China Morning Post. Hello to you both.
Hello.
Jonathan, I understand you've been having a wild social time, trying out new restaurants, appearing on podcasts, quite the man around the town.
Yes, indeed. I have been to a new restaurant, which was rather disappointing. I did a podcast, which everybody does these days.
I know, we'll talk about that later.
And otherwise, I've been just hibernating because of the weather.
Oh, it's absolutely vile, isn't it?
It is. It's weather to stay under the duvet.
Yeah. Well, you've been doing much more serious things. You've actually engaged in intellectual pursuits.
Well, I have, because I was forced indoors by the weather. And so I did go to a very interesting meeting at the Estonian embassy about this Baltic security. And that was followed up the next night by the Institut Français Night of Ideas, where they also talked about Baltic security. But other than that, I've been watching curling and the Olympics.
Ah, curling. What exactly is curling?
Well, I don't know, but I find it very soothing. It's pushing those things across the ice, and I don't quite understand it, but it seems to calm me down.
Jonathan, do you watch it?
Well, it obviously has a particularly strong calming effect because, when I'm out from under the duvet, I do go down to a cafe in the street under our flat, and there's a whole group of us there. And one of the men in the group said the other day, when the curling comes on, I turn off.
OK, not a fan then. Well, of course, you're getting coverage of all of those Winter Olympic Games on Monocle in Milan. That happens live every day here on the station, every weekday at 9 a.m. We've got a whole team there in Milan. And it's not just the sports. They're also talking to lots of people around the Games and talking to a lot of people in Milan about various businesses there. And a little bit later in the programme, we will hear from the team. But now, EU leaders have been meeting informally in Belgium today as debate around the bloc's future intensifies. The European Union is under pressure from several directions at once. An increasingly antagonistic United States under Donald Trump, strong-arm economic tactics from China, and ongoing hybrid threats from Russia. Well, together those forces are pushing Europe to rethink how it approaches trade, diplomacy and security. At the same time, new polling carried out for the Munich Security Conference, which opens tomorrow, shows a surge in the number of people across Europe and major emerging economies who now see the United States as a threat to their country's security. Well, this underlines how quickly confidence in Washington has eroded during Trump's first year back in office. So, Jonathan, this Belgian meeting feels informal, but the timing feels urgent. What are the European leaders trying to get ahead of?
Well, what Trump has done, whatever you think of him, is he's faced Europe with a basic problem, which it has, which is that it is not united enough to play the role it wants to play in global affairs, particularly vis-à-vis the United States and China. And whether this meeting in Belgium can reach any greater unity, I'm rather doubtful.
I wonder if Europe knows what the role it is it wants to play.
No, Europe wants to be taken as one of the big players in the world. But the EU, at any rate, is still made up of divergent countries which have divergent national interests and have always followed them.
I mean, Tira, I wonder, particularly in light of the talks you've been to this week on security in Baltic Sea, how Europe navigates this triple threat, this threat from Russia with hybrid warfare, including the cables, diplomacy and, of course, security and the economics too.
Well, the tone was sort of set by what Macron said earlier in the week, which was talking about threats and intimidation from Washington, as well as from Russia. So in one way, yes, I agree with Jonathan said. It is divergent countries. There's 27 different nations in the EU and many more in Europe. But having focused by the aggression, the diplomatic aggression from Washington, but also threats, particularly to areas around the Baltics that have been coming up more and more in these meetings, and the Baltic nations keep this very much on the agenda, and it's what is concerning many diplomats and also NATO.
I mean, Jonathan, if you're sitting in Beijing now, how does this moment in Europe look?
It looks pretty good, I must say, because you've had a group of, not a group, but a series of European leaders who've gone to China in recent months and weeks and will be going over the weeks to come. But they are very much talking. While they speak about Europe, they're very much talking their national interest there. And so you have France and Germany and the United UK who are all pushing their own interests, but while the EU finds it very difficult to reach a common stance vis-à-vis China. And in that context, it is very easy for Beijing to do, as it has always done, to cherry-pick between different European countries.
And I mean, Tira, Europe has talked for years about reducing dependency on China, but how achievable does that feel now?
Well, there is China controls, for example, one of the things that comes up again and again are the rare earth elements that China does have. They mine some of them, but they process nearly all of them, and that is what's needed for the green world. That's what's needed for the transition into green energy. So that's a very strong bottleneck that China controls.
And Jonathan, I wonder how Beijing benefits from this very apparent strain now between Europe and Washington.
Well, I think Beijing would see that. It sees kind of a great power arrangement, modus vivendi, if you like, with Washington, with the United States. But it sees Europe as a very promising marketplace, particularly, for instance, for electric vehicles at the moment. The Germans, who've made a huge investment in China, are now finding themselves undercut in China itself by Chinese-made goods, domestically made goods. And so now you've got the probability of Chinese manufacturers of EVs, solar power and other things coming into Europe and selling within Europe. So it's a good market as well as its geopolitical implications.
And Tira, I was talking about that poll a little bit earlier on, which suggests trust in the US has slipped very badly, and I wonder how that changes Europe's planning.
Well, yes. I mean, there's been a couple of polls that have been asking whether or not different countries consider America a reliable or unreliable ally. Well, unreliable is virtually all of them. All of the different polls say America is an unreliable ally, and the greatest number of polling numbers that call America unreliable are from France and from Germany. These are key partners that would have never said that in the past. So that causes worry, and it also, as Jonathan says, gives countries like China a look in.
Mm-hmm.
And another element in this, I think, is that looking ahead, crystal ball, one can see increasing strength within some of the major European countries, notably France and Germany, of political parties which look inward, basically. So the dynamic for further EU construction and the enlargement and strengthening of the single market must be very doubtful.
So, I mean, these doubts about the US are not confined to Europe. Israel, too, seems to have little idea what to expect. And following talks between the US and Israel yesterday, Trump said that there was no settled agreement on how to move forward with Iran. He insisted that he wants to avoid conflict. He wants negotiations to continue, but he offered little sense of a path forward. Now, Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu was expected to push for a broader approach to Iran. That's including limits beyond its nuclear program. He stressed Israel's security concerns, but he left without any clear public commitments. Now, unusually for Trump, who likes to conduct business in the full glare of the media spotlight, this meeting itself was notably discreet. So, Jonathan, do we know where talks with Iran actually stand now? Are they working?
No, we don't know. And it may be that the two sides, the US, or Trump at any rate, and Iran, are talking about different things. Trump talks about, we're very close to a deal, we'll have a deal, but any deal that he would be able to accept and sell to his domestic public probably involves some degree of regime change, and that would be a non-starter for Tehran.
And I mean, Tira, I wonder how much room for compromise there is, because each of the three countries, Israel, Iran and the US, seems to have a set of red lines. Is there space for negotiation?
I think there is space for negotiation, and I think that the factor that we have to remember is on the fulcrum making are the Arab countries and America's Arab allies, particularly Qatar. Now, Qatar is a voice of moderation, and that may perhaps been one of the reasons why the seventh visit of Netanyahu to Trump since he became president last year was kept private, because there's a lot more happening behind the scenes. Now, don't forget that there are negotiations ongoing in Oman, and the Iranians and the Americans have been going back and forth to Oman, and very high level Iranians have made it known that they're going to come. And Ali Larijani, who's on the Supreme National Security Council, have said, yes, he thinks there is some common ground with the United States.
But Jonathan, what incentive does Iran have to change course?
Well, it's very difficult to see an incentive if it would mean, as I just said a moment ago, regime change and the fall of the present regime in Tehran. It's turkeys voting for Christmas, and we don't. I wouldn't put big odds on that.
Yeah, Tira, why do you think these talks were conducted without the usual media circus?
Well, because I think of what's going on. I think it's because of what's going on in Oman. There's a lot that is being kept very private, and at the same time, there are more of the American aircraft steaming their way towards the Middle East. The USS Bush is on the way, and it's not going to arrive with the rest of the so-called armada, that was Trump's term, for another week or so. So I think there's various reasons why the Americans want to keep it in a holding pattern, and do some unusual behind-the-scene quiet diplomacy.
Yeah, and you have the quiet diplomacy, and then Trump can announce the big, beautiful deal.
Yes, and take all of the credit for it.
And take all the credit, of course.
I mean, there is this interesting new Bloomberg economics report. It looks like what renewed Middle East escalation would mean, particularly through energy markets. Yeah. Jonathan, where do the biggest threats lie?
Well, the energy markets and a war or conflict which rolls on without anybody able to stop it.
And Yeah, I mean, Tira, the report also says that a real shock would only come if energy infrastructure or choke points are hit. How close are we to crossing that line right now? How worried should we be?
I think we should be concerned, but not necessarily worried. The Americans have found that it's very difficult to wipe out the Iran nuclear program, but it's beyond what's in Iran. Don't forget about Iran's non-state allies, the ones that are in Iraq, the ones that are in Yemen. That is still something that's rumbling on and causing a tremendous amount of instability. And the non-state allies of Iran in Yemen, are able to hit tankers going through the Gulf. They're going through into the Gulf. And so they have a tremendous amount of negative power. And that negative power causes pause.
Which brings us back to the first topic we discussed, which is EU, the EU summit. One of the main issues there on the agenda was the high energy costs in the EU, which undoubtedly do handicap European industry, and the need to bring those down. And obviously a real war in the Middle East over Iran would kibosh that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, when diplomacy stalls at the highest level, as it seems it may have done in this instance, politics does have a habit of resurfacing elsewhere, sometimes where it's least welcome. So at the Winter Olympics, the Ukrainian skeleton racer Vladislav Heraskevich has been disqualified after refusing to remove a helmet honouring Ukrainians killed since Russia's invasion. So the decision was taken just 21 minutes before his event began in Cortina. Last-ditch talks with Kirsty Coventry, the president of the International Olympic Committee, failed to find a compromise. So, Tira, I mean, you watch the Olympics. How unusual is it for an athlete to be removed from the competition this late? I mean, 21 minutes, that's pretty close to the bone.
Oh, yes. And I'll tell you, listening to many of the other athletes, not just in the skeleton and bobsled and those events, but across Olympics, they were very much in support of the Ukrainian athlete, and they were horrified that this had happened because they pointed out this wasn't a political slogan that Heraskevich was carrying on his helmet. It was a memorial for athletes that had been killed in Ukraine.
Yeah. Yes, I think it should have been allowed to go ahead, the wearing of the helmet. After all, the Russian flag is not displayed at the Olympics. The Russian national anthem is not played, and that seems to me to have been a political decision.
I mean, do you think, Jonathan, that the rules around visible symbolism at the Olympics are clearly defined enough? Is that the problem?
Obviously not. And you're going to have these flare-ups from time to time.
So, Tina, Kirsty Coventry, whom I have to just fess up now I know and knew as a schoolgirl, has a controversial background as a former minister in the ZANU-PF government of Zimbabwe. That's a government internationally criticised for democratic backsliding. She only stepped down from that role to take up the IOC position. Do you think her personal background complicates the politics of this?
Well, that's a very interesting question. She was in tears after the meeting with Heraskevich, but whether or not those were crocodile tears or not, we don't know. But as Jonathan says, I mean, the Olympics are very political. Russia's banned there. There was Vice President Vance from America was booed heartily when he first arrived. There's been unveiling of signs, one very amusing one on Saturday night from an American spectator apologizing to the world for America and saying, sorry for our bad behavior. And he's, quote, "We will fix ourselves." So, and there's been demonstrations in previous Olympics that were very political. So I think this was a very bad call on the part of Coventry.
Yeah, well, I mean, Jonathan, is the Olympics the right place to make political statements?
Well, as Tira said, this was not a purely political statement. You can parse it as such, of course, but it should have been allowed to go ahead.
Although, would it have then opened the floodgates for more protests?
Of course.
Well, that's exactly the words that they used, the IOC committee, and they said, according to the Red Cross, there's 130 other conflicts around the world, and what would happen if everybody made a political statement? Well, maybe people would learn more about those 130 other conflicts. But ever since, Tommy Smith and Carlos and John Carlos did the Black Power salute in the Mexico Olympics in 1968, there have been political demonstrations of athletes in the Olympics.
It's bound to be a platform for remembrance or political statements.
I mean, it's very difficult to keep global conflict out of any big public event. And I mean, I'm just thinking here, even of the Grammy Awards and Bad Bunny, I'm sure you're completely familiar with who he is, Jonathan.
Yes, I rap with his tunes every night.
But I mean, he made this big statement about ICE. And then, of course, there was Bad Bunny again at the Super Bowl. And so you've got all of this going on. Things like the Oscars always have some kind of political message, don't they?
Yes, I mean, it wouldn't be a sporting event or a cultural event without a political message in these days of very divisive politics worldwide.
Except for curling.
Except for curling, and that's why I maintain that curling is good for the soul.
Yeah.
Well, questions about voice and control don't end with athletes. Politicians are wrestling with them too. And in these days where absolutely everybody, and I'm saying this, I hope you realise, in quite an incensed way, absolutely everybody thinks they should have a podcast, sometimes the politicians are doing it with a microphone in their hand. So the Swedish Prime Minister, Ulf Kristersson, has launched a weekly phone-in podcast called Ring Statsministern, or Call the Prime Minister.
Alla borde ju ta sig ett snack med sin statsminister då och då, och därför har jag startat en egen podd, Ring Statsminister.
I think that says everyone should have a chat with their government minister from time to time, which is why I started my own podcast, Call the Prime Minister.
How much of a chat do you actually have?
I don't know. I mean, I haven't listened to it, and clearly if I did, it would be in Swedish and I wouldn't understand it.
Well, I think the Prime Minister in Sweden is a great optimist that people do want to talk to him and want to talk to him seriously. I've got to say, one day, some years ago, Michael Portillo, who was my MP, was canvassing for votes on the street. It was very early in the morning, and he stopped me. I happened to walk past him. I was shocked to find him standing there canvassing on the street, and he said, "May I speak with you?" You know, he was very polite, and I said, "I'm terribly sorry. My policy is never to speak to politicians before 9 a.m. And he said, "Madam, I quite understand."
So just looking
I prefer not to talk to the public after 9 p.m., 9 a.m.
Because of course Sweden's got this an election coming up in September, and Kristersson's party, his centre-right moderates, are trailing in recent polls. So the idea apparently is to offer voters a direct line to him on Spotify or YouTube, and to project openness at a time when trust is pretty thin. Jonathan, what does this say about modern leadership when a Prime Minister turns to a call-in show?
Well, it says something pretty dire, I think. Mind you, I'm not sure that Gladstone would have been engaged in an open, friendly debate, as we are promised with the Swedish Prime Minister.
No. I wonder, I mean, Tira, to circle back from what we were talking about earlier and this lack of media spotlight on the Iran meeting, I wonder if this is straight from the Trump playbook, because his reality television start, now his every encounter with the world leader is conducted as if it is a talk show. Do you think that politicians now are taking his lead and they're trying to control the narrative through their own platforms?
Oh, if they try to follow that, they're real optimists. There's very few politicians that I think they would love to be able to have that spontaneity and that connection. You need a certain amount of you need a certain amount of grace and communication skills, and not many of them have it. Barack Obama had it to a certain extent when he did those village meetings, but I can only think of the really embarrassing moments. We could probably find far more embarrassing moments of politicians than ones that really were successful in reaching their voters.
I don't think it'll put Trump off, though. I mean, he will probably pick up this as an example of a good thing to do.
Absolutely.
Call in Donald.
Yes, exactly. Dial the Don. Dial the Don. I mean, can this...
You heard it here. Dial the Don.
Can this win over voters? Do you think that when polls move against a politician, is this the best way to counter it?
No, it's not going to do any good at all. I must just say I had a slightly different version of this, but some experience when I was a correspondent in France, talking on phone-in radio shows with leading politicians there, including the finance minister at the time, and their replies were so wooden that they wouldn't have convinced anyone.
I mean, maybe in France they should do it by email. You could have email Emmanuel.
Yes, well, Macron tried to get a discussion going with various members of the public, but when they didn't agree with him, he just told them they were stupid.
I mean, how would this work in British politics? Because, call Keir.
Okay, well, if you remember, when Boris Johnson was the mayor of London, he used to do a weekly Twitter press conference. And because as a former journalist, he sort of had a way with words as he typed, and he could choose which tweets to respond to. That was sort of groundbreaking and it fairly successful because he's very quick on his feet. But I was also doing a lot of work in African politics, and this was copied by a number of politicians in Kenya, and it just didn't work.
Because?
Yeah.
Well, they didn't like the lack of formality, because in some cultures you always say the honorable to politicians, although it doesn't trip lightly off the tongue in many European contexts. And so it just looked, and in the end you could tell they had just relegated the answering back to some aide that was probably in their 20s and was able to type faster and be a bit nimbler on their feet.
It isn't just the politicians, but I think it's also the callers in who tend to go on for a long, long time, very boringly, putting their point of view.
Oh, that's so true. And you find those people...
But no politician dares cut them off.
Yeah. Well, you find those people at literary festivals, and I absolutely dread when I hand over to audience questions, and then the person usually stands up and goes, this is more of a statement than a question.
Yeah, exactly.
And then they also try and take the microphone away from the volunteer. So I've got strict rules now. Never hand them the mic. Yeah. And the minute they say statement and question, off it goes. We're cutting you off. We do not want to hear.
Yeah.
But I mean, at the same time, maybe I'm wrong. I can't listen to vox pops on television. I sort of feel like that you're just filling time and I don't care what the man in the street is saying. But people say that that's wrong and that all of these people's views are very important and should be taken into consideration. But perhaps in the right format.
But how are they chosen, the people?
Exactly.
And it does tend to be what the French call remplissage, fill-ins. There.
Yeah, no, it does.
And you have to have a balance. So you've got to have somebody on the left, somebody on the right, somebody for, somebody against.
Yeah.
So on. So it'll be interesting to see how the Swedish experiment works.
Well, I mean, and this brings me back to knowing how to format something and the fact that not everybody can have a podcast. Why does everyone think they can, Tira? I've got one skill in the world, and now everybody thinks they can do it.
They do. And I think it goes back to this desire for some people, they want to be liked. And when we have a politician that we can feel that, I just really want to be liked, I think that we immediately dismiss them, and we're very cruel as voters, and they shouldn't press their luck. They should just tell us what they want to say.
Or press the off button.
That's for us voters to do.
Yeah.
We can absolutely do that. Finally, on today's programme, the Winter Olympics have been underway, as we've said, since Friday's opening ceremony in Milan. Monocle is there on the ground throughout the next 2 weeks, broadcasting from Allianz Winter Sky Lounge with a special show called Monocle in Milan. Well, earlier on that programme, our Europe editor-at-large, Ed Stocker, spoke to Yanis Exharos, the CEO of the Olympics Broadcasting Services. He started by asking him about how he got involved in the Games.
My Olympic journey started much earlier. It started in Sydney. Since after London that I became the CEO. But I got.
You've been doing this a long time.
A long time, and I got into it running the coverage for the Athens Games, and I thought that I would be doing it for one Games, and then I would do something else. And here I am, caught by the Olympic bug. But as you say, it's brilliant here because we're in the same building where the officers of the organizing committee have been for a number of years. So it was always a place where you could ponder and think and imagine what these games could be like in a very special place like this one.
I feel like I need to explain to some listeners who may not understand the sheer scope of what you do, because the Olympics Broadcasting Service is responsible for all the pictures and sound that come out of the Olympic Games, in the sense that they are distributing to the rights holders all the coverage, they're doing all the filming. It sounds like an exhausting job. I remember we did a sort of Monocle tour a few days ago and came to see what you do. You said you are collating something like 6,400 hours of coverage. It sounds like a very difficult task with a lot of people involved. Tell us about that.
This is correct, but on the other side, you get inspired by having to cover the greatest athletes in the world, and there is no incentive like that in the world. So to describe briefly what we do, we have the function what's called host broadcasting, which essentially means two things. One, to do the total comprehensive coverage of all competition plus all ceremonies for the Olympic Games, and to provide these images to all media rights holders around the world. The coverage, the broadcast of the Games goes practically around every part of the world, including in the Winter Games. And the second important task is to help all these media rights holders, who are more than 100, to slightly customize this coverage for the sake of their own audiences, to help them put their own commentators, to do their own interviews with their athletes, focus a little bit more on the athletes coming from their countries. The scope of it, as you said, it's quite large. Here we will produce something like 6,500 hours.
100 hours out with my figure.
Of broadcast, even though the total duration of competition is around 1,000 hours. The reason why we shoot so much is because in today's world you have to provide all different types and of flavors of content. People do not consume content in the same way across demographic, across ages, and across their daily lives. It's not just traditional television or linear television, it's social, it's digital, it's streaming, and we do produce for all these different formats. And it's very important that we do so because the Olympics remains one of the large, great audience aggregators. So it's a meeting place for all audiences. We do not have the luxury to say, we focus more on the Generation Z or we focus more on this country and so on. We need them all. This is what makes the Olympics special. It's a unifying force.
And no pressure at all with several billion people watching around the world, right? None at all.
Correct. We hope that here it's going to be around 3 billion. But just to give you an idea, in Paris, 18 months ago, we had 5 billion people following the Olympic Games. What does it practically mean? That 89% of the human population from the age of 5, 6 and above who have access to television or an internet connection followed the Games. On average, on traditional television, people watched, on average, 9 hours of coverage during the 2 weeks. And people with an access to social media account, they checked their social media for Olympic content 100 times on average during these 2 weeks. So it was a massive, massive following.
You mentioned the fact that you produce a lot more coverage than the actual length of the Games. You've been CEO since 2012, but you've been doing this much longer. Has the viewing audience got more demanding in the sense that they need all these things? They need these short clips. Has it become, I guess, in a way harder to do this job because people want more and more and more every time?
Yes, this is correct. In a sense, it has become harder because there is not a single way of producing that is sufficient for all audiences. Today, you have different audiences, different demographics that consume in different ways, but also the same people do consume throughout the day. I mean, you wake up in the morning, you check your mobile phone, you go to your office, you pretend to be working, while on your laptop you also watch a little bit of the games. Then you go back home, maybe you have a bigger screen with friends. So the viewing habits have become more diverse. This puts more pressure on us, but on the other hand, I would say that it does also provide us with more opportunities to make the games really a much more intense and immersive experience for people throughout their lives during these days. And it's important to note that more than half of the audience of the Olympic Games are not sports fans. They're what we call casual fans. And this is, if you will, the power of the games, that they inspire people who are not necessarily into sports. They are people who tune in only every 2 or 4 years. And somehow I also feel that this is an important contribution of sports in the Olympic world to the world. I hope that many people will agree with me that we live at times where unifying forces are fewer and fewer, and the Olympics is one of them, and we need them. And if sport has this capacity, I think we need to do whatever it takes to enforce this message.
Yanis Exharos there, speaking to our Europe editor-at-large, Ed Stocker, on Monocle in Milan. For more of our coverage from the Winter Olympics, tune in to Monocle in Milan every day this week at 9 a.m. London time, that's 10 a.m. in Milan on Monocle Radio, or listen wherever you get your podcasts. And that's all for this edition of the Monocle Daily. A big thanks to my panellists today, Tira Schubart and Jonathan Fenby. Today's show was produced by Monica Lillis and researched by Annalise Maynard. Our sound engineer was Elliot Greenfield, and I can tell you that the very good dog Bella was also in the background, giving very helpful contributions. I'm Georgina Godwin here in London. The Monocle Daily is back at the same time tomorrow. Goodbye, and thanks for listening.